And welcome to SharePoint Power Hour. This is our weekly show that we do every Wednesday at 11 Central. Welcome if it's your first time. And I'm Laura Rogers, and this is my team at Rackspace Hosting. We're a team of SharePoint consultants. We have a SharePoint practice and an Office 365 practice within Rackspace. And SharePoint Power Hour we do it every week. It's live streaming using a Google Hangout over to YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, SharePoint RAX, where we have all these Power Hours are all recorded, and they live in there in a playlist. And Power Hour is all about what you can do with SharePoint and Office 365 without programming and without hardcore server administration. So it's tons of topics. Basically, besides those, we do things like out-of-the-box functionality. We have discussions about topics like social governance, architecture, planning. We do demos a lot of the time. A lot of time when I do demos, I just make it up as I'm going. I don't plan it. So last week, we got to do our Power Hour live from Microsoft Ignite conference, so that was a lot of fun, getting to see the team all together in person, except for minus Tavis, who we missed very much. So today's demo, Joelle is going to be doing today's discussion on governance, and we'll go ahead, and a couple people aren't here today because of other client calls and things like that, but we'll go ahead and introduce Kevin and then Stephen, and then we'll go to Joelle. Before that, real quick, if you're looking at us in YouTube, then there's going to be a little yellow link on the YouTube video that takes you over to the Google Hangout, and when you're in the Google Hangout, there's actually a Q&A panel that you can use. So that's why we do these live, so you guys can ask questions and give us feedback. So it's just a little hard to find the Q&A panel because there's a little sort of set of squares towards the top right in that Google Hangout screen, and those are little apps you can switch between. So one of them is the Showcase app, which is where we share links, and one of them is the Q&A app. So that's where you can go in, and I'd love for you all to just go say hi and say that you found the Q&A, and then just use that to communicate with us as we're going. So I'll go ahead and let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Kevin Hughes. I'm a SharePoint architect here in Rackspace, based out of Kansas City. My apologies if you hear a tornado siren behind me. I can't control that; it's going off. My role here on the team is as architect is to work with our clients to figure out their needs. And see if we can't solve their issues in SharePoint or provide them a good solution to help their business grow, and then work with our team to deliver it.
Hello, I'm Stephen Wilson. I'm also on the Business Solutions team. I do a lot of our migrations, some of our installations for customers that are not hosted at Rackspace. Do a lot of work with sort of customers that are just starting on SharePoint or just starting with a new version of SharePoint, getting them going with sort of the basics of, I have SharePoint and what do I do now? And I think Ryan hopped in after Laura assigned who would go when, so we'll let Ryan go next.
Alrighty. Hi everybody, I'm Ryan Keller. I am based out of Colorado, and I am the branding guy on the team here at Rackspace. As you might guess, my role involves branding SharePoint and making it look a little less like SharePoint and a little more like what the clients want.
Are you saying they don't want to look like SharePoint?
No, no one wants it to look like SharePoint. Now we do branding on all kinds of ranges, so we make it look a little less like SharePoint or not at all like SharePoint, so we can do anything. We're magic.
Oh, and towards the end we can chat a little bit more about Ignite too, just for the last couple minutes and kind of our recap, by the way.
Sure. All right, so I guess I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I am Joelle Farley. I am on the Business Solutions team based out of Atlanta, Georgia, where it is actually sunny today, which is nice. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about governance. So basically, one of the links that I'll have in my presentation that I'll put into our sharing, where we can share links on the Google Hangout, is going to link you to this poster that Microsoft created for SharePoint 2013 governance. And so what I did when I first started working with clients and planning governance for SharePoint 2013 is I basically took that poster and broke it down, and started using that kind of as a guide or a way that I could, kind of help people plan their, get their governance plans together. And then of course I added things to it because, it's a really great poster and it has a lot of detail in it, but there are some things that are missing. So I added some stuff to that. So I'll include that link at the end of my presentation, and I'll also share it in here as well. But that's a really good resource for you guys, and we'll kind of start with that and go from there. So let me go ahead. I have a presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and share. And then definitely, I really want this isn't demo heavy. A lot of the things that we do are usually pretty demo heavy, and I know people like that, but this one's going to definitely be more of a conversation about governance and kind of just some of the things that I typically go through and some of the things that I would recommend for anyone who's trying to figure out, where to get started with planning governance. So definitely, ask us questions. I have a few discussion points in there. Hopefully my team will have some input. I know that Kevin has way more experience than even I do with governance, so definitely, Kevin, if you have anything, please jump in. I would really appreciate that. So definitely put your questions out there, or just anything that you've done or that you would recommend, and we'll definitely kind of make this as interactive as possible. So let me go ahead, and hopefully my screen share will work here. So let's do this. And let me know if you guys are seeing a PowerPoint. Are you guys seeing that?
Yep.
Okay. All right. All right, so governance planning, we know that's what we're talking about today. So what is a governance plan? Just to kind of start at the beginning, in case you are just really new to, you've not had to create a governance plan in the past. So basically, like what it says here is, in the IT world, a governance plan is a set of roles, responsibilities, procedures, policies that an organization can build around the usage of a particular piece of technology. And so obviously the focus for this is going to be SharePoint. So then as you work through formulating and defining, all of the different sections that we're going to kind of talk through, you would begin writing a document. So not only are you going to have a team that meets and has discussions around governance, but you're also going to want to create a document. The document it's a really important piece of the plan, because it's going to be where you're kind of documenting, if you will, documenting all of the things that you discuss and all of the policies and stuff that you want to put into place. But one of the things that we all know is that besides your governance team, and sometimes not even your governance team, users aren't going to read the governance plan cover to cover, because there's going to be a lot of information in there. It's not always going to be, relevant to everyone. So one of the things that I typically will ask if I'm helping a governance team that's just kind of starting to form and get together is, what are some of the ways that they feel that the rules and the procedures, can either be communicated or put in place for their users in the new SharePoint environment. So I just want to kind of, and I'm going to see, the unfortunate part is I don't have two screens today, so I can't see the Q&A. So let me know if you guys see any Q&A stuff. I just want to kind of get anyone's, what do you think are some ways that you could communicate as you put new rules and procedures in place? You could communicate those to users. One of the things that I have seen, while we're kind of seeing if anybody has any that they've experienced, or that any ideas on that, one of the things that I've seen is basically creating almost like a 1-page or 2-page application usage guideline. So where it just kind of has some high-level things like, these are the type of security groups that you use. If you use versioning, you need to do it it this way. If you're using any kind of retention policies, you need to use this archive. Just kind of has some of those things that the governance team is probably going to discover and talk through during the planning. They can put some of those very important things into a 1 or 2 page usage guideline and then put that on the intranet or make that available to users. Do you guys see anything in the QA? No.
I don't see anything in the QA,
okay.
But I agree that you need to have something that's easily digestible that people can understand just quickly and not have to feel like they're overwhelmed with having to read that every day or something crazy, to remember what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, there's also things you can do around auditing. There's also third-party tools so that you don't necessarily just have to. I mean, you definitely want to communicate a lot of that stuff up front, but you can also on the back end you can kind of control, some of the policies and stuff, and kind of keep an eye on that stuff as the environment gets into regular usage. All right, so we'll kind of, if you have any ideas there, feel free to put them in, but we'll kind of move forward. So governance planning prep, so there is some stuff that you need to do and kind of have in mind before you actually sit down at the table to start talking about governance. So you first want to assemble the team. So you want to, include people from IT. So you want to include people that are going to be the support for SharePoint, whether that's on the infrastructure side, development, maybe trainers and that kind of thing. You want to make sure that they're included, but you don't. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is their governance team is all IT, so they don't include anyone from the business, and that's kind of a mistake when it comes to SharePoint governance, because you definitely want to include folks from the business as well. So that could be executive sponsor. So maybe if there is a specific executive that's kind of sponsoring or helping push the SharePoint project forward, you might want to include them in the governance team. It could also be site admins, so some certain power users or site admins, and then just other people that represent certain business units that use SharePoint and are highly involved. So you want to make sure that it's a well-rounded team so that you have representation from as many areas as possible. What I typically recommend is you have an initial review, maybe when you're still kind of building out your site or preparing for migration, and then create an action plan for any unknowns. So one of the things that what I'll do today is I'll go through the different areas that you should cover in your plan and talk about the details in each of those. So what you would want to do is kind of sit down with your governance team once you have a team and go through that initial review and make some decisions. And so there may be some things that you don't quite know yet, or you need to go back to the business, maybe do some surveying, maybe look at do some testing and that kind of thing before you can make a final decision on a policy. But definitely have that initial review so you can create that action plan of unknowns. And then once the environment is ready, you want to meet again and finalize your document. So when you have that initial review, you're going to start putting your plan together, but you definitely want to meet again before anything goes live and just kind of finalize everything and make sure that you've come up with a way to not only communicate the environment and train users and that kind of thing, but also communicate the policies and procedures that you're putting in place. And during that, excuse me. During that second meeting, you want to fill in any gaps from the initial review. And typically, when I work with a client to do governance planning, it's usually about 3 days of going through this entire, all of this stuff this presentation is going to talk about, and having a discussion. That's usually a good start for a typical intranet. It may be more time may be needed. Like I said, you typically are going to have your initial review, and then you're going to want to meet again to kind of finalize everything. And then, of course, once you kind of finalize things, then the next thing is what we'll talk about is you're also going to want your governance team to meet regularly as well to look at issues and possible changes and that stuff. So there's just some prep there for kind of getting ready for governance planning. So what makes up SharePoint governance? This is I mentioned earlier that I kind of pulled a lot of what I do for 2013 governance from a poster that Microsoft created, and this is part of that. You'll see these little icons and images that are coming from that poster, and like I said, I'll make sure to put a link out there of that. So what makes up SharePoint governance? For 2013, we've kind of split it into 3 different areas. So you have IT governance, you have information management, and application management. So I'm going to talk through each of these things and kind of just give an overview of what those mean, and then we'll go into each of those sections and talk about the specific areas that you would want to discuss under each of those. So IT governance overview, so it's made up of 2 different pieces. You have the team and communication piece of IT governance, which is going to relate to basically the governance team and its communication and also how it communicates to users, and then also the infrastructure and platform management. So team and communication, it's going to include the roles and responsibilities that you're going to basically be representing, whether that's on the governance team or just kind of across your user base. So whether you have power users or end users or site admins or however you decide to define those. A communication plan, so this is going to be key for the communication plan is going to include a couple of different things. So it's going to be the communication of your governance team. So, how often are you going to meet? Are you going to always meet in person? Are you going to meet remotely? Or if a decision needs to be made, does it have to wait till the meeting, or does there going to be a kind of a communication that you can you email each other or use a SharePoint survey or something for making decisions outside of the meeting? Just kind of thinking of things like that. Another part of the communication plan that you want to think about is how is the team going to communicate to users, when the new site is ready or when there's changes that are going to be made to the SharePoint environment. All of that kind of stuff you want to kind of think through and come up with a plan. Just the future direction, so just kind of having an idea. So a lot of times we see that intranets are split into 2 or 3 phases. So you may have phase 1 is just kind of your first build out and migration. Phase 2 you may be getting into some business processes and stuff like that. And phase 3 you may be getting into, typically we see people using that last phase for social, enterprise social, more advanced search options and that kind of thing. So you really just want to, just like you would with anything, you really want to have your goals and the direction of the environment. You want to have that documented as a part of your governance plan as well, so that you can make sure that all your policies and stuff kind of align with that. User adoption, so that's a big thing. Think through some ways that you would, push user adoption, and we'll talk a little bit more detail about that when we get into it. Migration, just any details around, how are you going to do the migration, what's the migration schedule, who's going to be responsible, and that kind of thing. Training, and then support. So, I also want to talk about, training users and then supporting users. And then infrastructure and platform management. Now this is going to be where it's going to vary how you're managing your environment. So obviously if you have an on-premise SharePoint implementation where you have the server on-premise, then it's probably going to be this area you're going to probably want to include a little bit more detail because you yourself are managing it. If you're being hosted with somebody like Rackspace, you may want to include things like what Rackspace does versus what your IT is responsible for. And then also, lastly, if you're doing something like Office 365, then this might be there's probably going to be a lot less content in this area, but you would still want to include things like your service level agreements, guidelines around, your site policies and storage quotas and that kind of stuff, and just some of the general things that you see in the admin panel for Office 365. So this area could definitely vary depending on what type of environment you're dealing with. So that was IT governance. The second piece is information management. And so we all know that SharePoint's nothing without well-managed and maintained content. So you definitely want to get a good information architecture going as soon as possible. So the governance for information architecture is going to cover things like site collection and site structure, navigation, your types of content and division of content, the tagging, the managing your metadata, search, content types, all of that kind of stuff. So once the different types of content have been identified, another good thing that you want to do is think through the life cycle of your content types. So if I have a form content type or an SOP content type or my company event content type, whatever things that I decide to create, then I want to think through some, is there workflows related to those? Will content approval be required? Do documents need to, versioning? If it's a document content type, do we need to put versioning on? Is there retention or audit policies that need to be, put in place right away around those specific types of content? Or are we going to leave that up to power users and end users? So just thinking through some of that. And then the second half of this kind of information management piece is information access, which is really, really important. Obviously, that's security. So you definitely want to think through, are you going to use AD groups or SharePoint groups? Or is it going to be a hybrid of the two, which is probably usually the best option? Who can manage permissions and where are they going to be able to do that? Is anonymous access something that's needed? Will you need to use audience targeting on your home page? Is there an extranet solution? So you need to think through and kind of document what you're doing for authentication when you're dealing with an extranet type solution. So just thinking through some of those things, and that's typically what we talk about with information management. And we'll go into more detail in a bit. And then application management. So we obviously can't forget the developers and any of the lovely custom stuff that we may have in our SharePoint environments. So this is going to be where the law is laid down on all things custom. So it could be things like third-party apps or internally developed applications or even branding. So Ryan's area. The first piece is really to determine if there's a need for, a development, a test environment, a QA environment. Most of the time you at least want to have one of those, but depending on the types of customization and what you're doing with SharePoint, you may only need one. If you're doing something where you need, where there's a lot of custom development happening, then you may want to have all three. So just thinking through that and determining, how are those environments managed and that kind of thing. And then the next piece is basically to create some guidelines around just the process for testing solutions, packaging and deploying, what are the approved tools, who's going to support it. If you're moving to 2013 and you're considering going towards the new SharePoint app model, just thinking through, documenting, what that means and, how that's going to work for your users. And also, one thing that I kind of put as a note here, and I'll talk about it again in a little bit, it's important to decide how to handle the App Store. So in addition to just the app model and how developers are going to work with the app model, you also want to think about, if you're going to use the App Store, are you going to allow users to just download whatever apps that they want to download? Is there going to be an approval process there? Maybe you need to put in a policy where if somebody wants an app from the App Store, the governance team needs to approve it or test it first, and then communication may need to go to across the company so that everyone's aware that that app's still available. So just thinking through some of that, since that's kind of a new piece of 2013. All right. So any questions, or do you guys have any comments? My team here, Kevin, Laura, do you guys have any comments?
Jack Cheney says woohoo for IT crowd.
Yes. Got to have those memes in there.
Yeah, I'm all about automating governance. So like anything you can do just so the settings are there automatically, so people don't have to remember to do it.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff you can't do without third-party products in SharePoint, so that gets tricky. But yeah.
I'm also glad that you mentioned the part about not keeping IT as like your primary governance group, because that almost always turns into a nightmare, because then the IT people, assign all these roles to other people who had no part in making up the governance rules, and they're like, well, we don't know how to do that, or we don't want to do that, and it all just falls apart.
And what was your quote, Stephen, that you said? People say to us a lot, governance sounds hard. Can't we just make it up as we go along? What's the worst that can happen? Even just put that in a little chat window.
Yeah.
We hear that a lot, believe it or not.
Yeah, there's been quite a few times where I say, okay, so what about governance? And they look at me like, what? I get that response, and I'm like, really? Really? Come on, guys.
We've seen the results of no governance, so we can
Yeah.
talk about that
It
too.
does not end well.
Well,
It never goes well.
and one thing to point out with governance is that I have to do with my clients very often is it's not just a piece of paper that you do once and you put off in the files or network share somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a living document that's updated as your business changes or as the product changes. It has to be continually updated, just like any other policy. But the sometimes even a bigger issue with my clients is that they forget the idea that this governance really has absolutely no purpose or weight if there's not executive sponsorship to give it the same place in the company as their computer use or email use policies. With all that weight of follow this or else that any of the other policies in the company have.
Exactly. Yeah, the living document's a very important point to make, because it's definitely something that's why I kind of mentioned that in the beginning. How to communicate these policies and make sure that they're kind of well represented, like you said, Laura, whether it's an automation or you just have it kind of posted somewhere or whatever, just coming up with ways that users can see that and that you kind of keep it in their minds. And also, the whole living document thing kind of goes back to making sure your governance board actually gets together. A lot of times I've seen working with clients, I will help them create a plan, form their governance team, and kind of get it ready, and then they never meet again. And then it just everything that we did kind of falls to the wayside. And like you said, Kevin, the document just ends up on a file shared, buried in a SharePoint site somewhere, and nobody ever looks at it again. So just kind of making sure that you're staying, keeping things going. I would typically, and we'll talk about this since we're actually already in the IT governance team and communication section. So one of the things that I typically do is I say that I would assign somebody to be responsible for the agenda every month or quarter or however often you're going to meet. And on the agenda, you want to do things like look at the goals, look at any of the outstanding areas that you may have not put policies on yet, look at issues that have been brought to the support teams or the help desk. Look at things like new, if there's going to be a new application, custom application built, or a branding change, looking at all that stuff. Another thing that I often suggest, especially with 2013, is that person who's responsible for the agenda should also run the search reports that are available in 2013 now. So you guys will, some of you have kind of worked with 2013 for a while, probably familiar with those. But there are things like looking to see how many abandoned queries there are in search, or if there's a specific word or query that's being searched constantly, maybe looking at that to see, like, okay, everybody, we noticed that the word expense report is being searched 30 times a day. Maybe that could tell you that, okay, well, maybe we need to feature the expense report, a link to the expense report or something about the expense report, maybe right on the home page. And also just even looking at abandoned queries is probably even more important, because that's going to show you where somebody has queried or looked for something and gotten no results and kind of abandoned their query, didn't click on anything, and looking to see why that is, and maybe there's some issue with metadata or crawl or something going on. So just kind of running those reports. If you are using third-party tools like Laura mentioned, like AvePoint or something like that, where you actually have some of those additional governance reports, running those things and taking a look at them. So all of that stuff is definitely important. And that's a big part of the governance meetings. So team and communication, so governance board, we talked a little bit about that. Roles and responsibilities, I'll discuss in just a second. It's on the next slide. So the roles and responsibilities is going to be kind of some of the representation that you would want on your governance team, as well as just some of the roles and responsibilities that you need to have assigned, whether it's just one individual, multiple individuals, or somebody outside of your organization. But definitely have those roles assigned. Meetings, so we talked a little bit about that. I mentioned the, having somebody to kind of be responsible for the agenda and putting that together and sending that out, running those reports. Also, making sure that you have a good idea of when you're going to meet. If you are pulling in executives or director level people, it might be that you need to meet, quarterly, or maybe you have like a sub-governance team that meets once a month, and then the bigger governance team meets quarterly. You can really do a lot with it, a lot with that, depending on the size of your organization and who needs to be a part of the team. Goals and future direction, we talked about communication, I mentioned. So user adoption, I didn't get into too much detail when I mentioned this earlier, so I want to talk a little bit about this. So some ideas here is you just want to, when you're kind of doing your governance plan, you want to think through, what are ways that you can help push adoption of SharePoint. That could be user groups, so maybe you want to create a small meeting, a 30-minute like brown bag lunch session, or kind of like your own power hour, if you will, inside your organization, where you first may give like a 15 or 20-minute demo on something new that they can do. Maybe you're just pointing out that they can, how they can use versioning, or you're pointing out how they can use Excel services, or you're just doing kind of like a quick demo for power users. And then the second part of it, you can listen to questions that they may have, or concerns. Some of that stuff may even give ideas for things that need to be discussed during the next governance meeting. So that might be an idea. So it's basically like an internal SharePoint user group. They can meet once a month, once a quarter, however often seems to work. But that's probably a really good way to kind of get some adoption and start spreading the word about some of the features and things that can be done in SharePoint. And also kind of getting, you're empowering your power users with things like that. So that's another good way to do that. Another thing that I've seen is a naming contest. So if you want to, and this would obviously be something that you would need to do early on when you're kind of moving to your new farm or new environment, and a naming contest. So maybe you want to change the name of your intranet. So you're going to allow users to submit some ideas. Then there might be a voting, and then a prize for whoever gets picked, whatever the best name is. So that's kind of a good way. It's a good way of communicating that there's a new intranet coming, and kind of getting people excited.
So we've got a question in here, and I've also got a comment about the naming thing. So Susan says, is this different from a requirements in parentheses design document, the governance document?
Yes, it is different. So the requirements and the kind of like your roadmap and design should be done prior to this. But you should use some of that. So like when you're doing your IA planning and stuff like that, you're going to use the stuff that you plan. You're going to then take that and decide how to govern it, and that's what you're going to do in the governance document. So those are two separate things. And typically, the requirement stuff is done first, and then you're going to start this after that.
Yeah, and hopefully the governance stuff, you're delegating a lot of that, so you're not having to be, the IT department's not having to manage every single site collection. You're delegating sort of the governance of site collections to different people, hopefully, and not like it's an IT thing where you're just setting up servers and building sites.
Exactly.
Also, what was that, Kevin?
Another thing to think about, the requirements and design document is those documents are very technical. They involve the initial setups, the initial builds, and so forth. The governance document not only has what was built, but it also goes into a lot of roles and responsibilities, support models, the change management, and that kind of thing that you really will never see in a design or requirements document.
Also about the naming of SharePoint, there's actually in group policy in Active Directory, there's actually a way to officially change your SharePoint product name. It actually changes something in the registry for people, so that when they're opening Word and they're opening Excel and they're saving stuff to SharePoint, it actually says your custom name in there. So it's when you're looking in your group policy, it's under the Microsoft Office 2013/miscellaneous, and it's called SharePoint product name. And I'll put a link to that whole Office resource kit thing that I'm referring to, but yeah, you can do that too.
Yep. Absolutely. That's awesome. Good information. And then yeah, so the naming contest, I saw once, and it went over really well. It was pretty funny. So they, a client that I had a an intranet that they hated. It was not SharePoint. It was built. I think it was something that they built internally, but it was, it had a really bad rap, and nobody used it, and it was not liked, and so they actually had a funeral. So they had like a small get together after, at the end of the day, I think on a Friday or whatever, and they had like a funeral for the old intranet and kind of welcoming in the new intranet, and that kind of went over pretty well, and people got excited about it. And during the quote unquote funeral, they were doing demos of and just kind of showing off what the new intranet was going to look like, and passing out they made like a little flyer on it with some really cool screenshots, and they were kind of passing that out, and it went over pretty well because users could just kind of come in and take a look, grab a cupcake, grab a flyer, and they kind of got an icebreaker to the new intranet. So just some thoughts there. So training, just documenting the training that is going to be required. So Kevin mentioned roles and responsibilities. So once you determine that you're going to have, site admins, you're going to have power users, and you're going to have end users, then you want to have some detail around the training that's required for each of those to kind of take on that role. So if I'm an end user and I want to become a power user, then what are the steps or what are the training that I have to take in order to get that point, and is there any kind of like testing that I have to go through, just kind of thinking through that. Also, if you already have a kind of a training organization, maybe you're going to, tack on the SharePoint training onto that. Or is it something that it's going to be kind of like a remote virtual training that people can take that's like a recording or something? Or are you going to point to like a third party to do your training? Just kind of thinking through and making sure that you have the plan and also the steps that a user should take from if they want to go from end user to power user, or from power user to site admin. And then under training it says brown bags again. That could just be for falls with that user group thing I mentioned earlier. And then support and service level agreements. So, who is going to be, what is your support model, basically? So when a user has an issue, do they go to the power user on their team, and then the power user goes to the site admin, and then the site admin may, maybe they call the IT help desk, and a ticket gets logged, and then the IT help desk may escalate that further to like the SharePoint person or the SharePoint developer or something. So just kind of making sure that you document those steps, and on each of those levels the type of things that they would be responsible for. So let's say if the power user needs to give somebody different security or give them access to something, then the site admin may be responsible for doing that. But if the power user is trying to use Excel services and they get an error and the site admin doesn't know what to do about that error, then that may be something that needs to get escalated. So just kind of making sure that you, in your support model, you actually say the types of issues and the types of escalation that you would see, and then also just what the hours are. A lot of people forget that you want to make sure you communicate. People may be working in the middle of the night on SharePoint and run into an issue. So you want to make sure that is there after hours help, or is it only 9 to 5 Monday through Friday? So you're just making sure that that's documented as well.
Hey, there's a question.
Okay.
Can you see it? It's kind of long. It's Tushar has a question in there.
No, I can't, because I can't. I mean, I can, but then you guys are just looking at yourselves, so I can do that.
Oh, okay. I'll read it to you. Business is always. Let's see. Click select. Business is always concerned that IT might be peeking on the business data. Oh, peeking as in looking at the business data. How to set up a governance around that, and how to assure business that their site is secure from IT.
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, there's going to be folks in IT, whether they're just the kind of like the SharePoint site, site collection administrators or SharePoint administrators, they're going to have access to everything. But you want to make sure that even inside of IT, that only the people that should have that access, It shouldn't just be like all of IT has, full control over everything. But you want to make sure that, you're going to have a SharePoint administrator who's going to have full control over the whole farm. You're going to have, a site collection administrator that's going to have, as it's kind of talks about that on this slide I'm on right now. So you're going to have people like that in order to just get things done, and to kind of make sure that the environment's staying in order. But then you can make sure that in your governance document that you show what those roles are and who fills those roles, and that it's not just like a free-for-all, all of IT has access to everything, because obviously there's people in IT that may not really even do anything with SharePoint. So you want to make sure that you have that documented. And I don't know if Kevin, if you have any feedback.
Site collection owners is a big thing that I think about, because whoever those one or two site collections owners are, they can get everything in that site collection. But like at Rackspace internally, whoever requests that site collection, the person in the business, they're the site collection owner. So IT doesn't necessarily have that kind of access, but then we've delegated that to them. But then you got to be careful about training that person in that whole full control thing. And once you start giving people full control, then people with full control can give other people full control.
Exactly.
So so there's just that concept of being careful about who you give full control to anywhere, and making sure that they're trained and they know what they're doing and what that really means. Because I think people need full control in a lot of cases, and they really don't.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely looking at, and then just if maybe taking the full control permission and creating like a custom permission level off of that, where you remove some of the dangerous access that comes with, and kind of using that instead of full control. And then, like you said, just the training is important. So you want to, if I want to become a site collection administrator, if I want to become a power user, I should have to take this class and maybe even sign off on a policy that says, okay, these are the things that you can do with this access, and if you do anything outside of that, then there could be repercussions for doing that. So just kind of making sure that stuff is kind of thought through and put in place before, for sure.
I'm going to put a link in there too, to one. Haven't written much about governance, but I wrote one blog post about kind of addressing what we just talked about, so I'll put that in there too.
Okay.
If I may, one thing to think about, back to I think the meat of that question is that SharePoint is just another IT system like email or databases, and so there's an email administrator that runs your email system in your company, and while they do have the ability to go and look at every single email that goes through there, they don't have the time. But if directed to do so by the management or the executives, they will go in and look at your emails and print them all out and give them to legal or whoever. The same thing with data stored in databases or files on file shares. There's somebody administering those that has full access to all that information. SharePoint's no different than that. It's just another system, and I think Joelle's pointed out, really well, that someone owns that platform, and somebody or a team of somebody's administers that platform just like any of the others in your company. And so somebody will have full access to go and fix things and train people and so forth, just like email. So I think if you point out that it's just another system and equate it to the way email is run, I think it's a lot easier to get the company ease their minds a little bit about, are you going to see everything? Because while we may have access, doesn't mean we've got the time. But if given the directive to do so, we'll go look at everything and we'll discover everything that's going on in there and give it to whoever we're directed to do so, just like anybody else.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so we kind of talked about roles and responsibilities a little bit. So you have these are just some of the areas that we typically recommend. Like I said, this could be multiple people that represent this. This could be a third party that kind of handles this. But you definitely want to have a SharePoint owner, and this could be that person I mentioned that kind of manages the agenda and kind of makes sure that the governance board gets together. And they kind of have the overall responsibility of aligning the goals and initiatives with the governance plans and making sure that lines up with what the initiatives are for the SharePoint environment and the company. The SharePoint infrastructure administrators, that's the person kind of responsible for the back-end maintenance and setup of SharePoint. Your developers and your designers, so the people that are going to do your custom development and branding. Site collection, SharePoint site collection administrator, so we talked about that role. This is the person responsible for helping end users with day-to-day tasks, and this could not only be an SCA, because we call the site collection administrator SCA. It may not only be that person, but you may have you may have the SCA for the intranet, and then if there's subsites in the intranet, you may have site admins that are actually filling the role of helping end users. So it really just depends. You kind of want to make sure you have that understood and what permission levels and what training it takes to get to that level and that kind of thing. Business alignment analyst is something that maybe the SharePoint owner may roll into one role or maybe a separate thing, and that's kind of the person who's responsible for communicating with business units and the organization and making sure that their needs are represented during the governance planning phase. This could be somebody from like corporate communications. They're the ones who are responsible for saying, okay guys, these changes are coming, or here's the communication on the new intranet and that kind of thing. And then also just the whole power users versus end users, making sure you have a clear line there, making sure that you identify who your power users are and what training is required of them before they become power users in the new environment. And like we said, what policies they need to sign off on for anything that you come up with. So kind of move forward. I think I'm got about 15 minutes left, so kind of go through some of this a little bit quicker. So infrastructure and platform management, some of the things that you want to make sure that you are highlighting in there, and there's it can even go beyond this, especially if you're dealing with an on-premise situation. You want to have a diagram of your farm in your governance plan, so you want to make sure that at any time you can go in there, and you want to make sure it's an updated diagram too. That somebody can go to your governance plan, open it up, and see, a Visio or whatever type of diagram in your plan to see exactly how what's going on in the farm and what servers are out there and exactly how it's built. You want to include browser and Office requirements. So you want to say this is the browser that we require for you to use SharePoint. This is the version of Office that you're required to have for use within SharePoint. It sounds like I'm saying SharePoint, doesn't it? Maybe it's wishful thinking, I guess. But so with the Office requirements, even if you're using Office web apps, you still may want to have specific requirements around the type of version of Office that they should have, and if they don't have that, then what are some of the problems that they may experience. Backup and recovery, so a clear policy around, if something's deleted, what are the ways how long do you have to get to that back? Where is that backup information being stored? How long is it kept? All that kind of stuff. Outage reporting, so if there is suddenly whether it's scheduled or unscheduled, if there's an outage, how is that going to be communicated? Is making sure that whoever's your front line of defense, whether it's your site admins or it's like a help desk scenario, making sure that they fully understand and that that it's communicated to them when there's an outage and that they know what to say to users. Active Directory, so just kind of having a clear, kind of clearly stating, the policies for, if you're using My Sites, so maybe there's some stuff that's syncing from Active Directory into your My Site profile, but then also including in that, if you're allowing users to update their My Sites, the new areas that you'll see in 2013, like past projects, skills, and that kind of stuff, or photos even, if you're allowing them to update those things and you're kind of making that a part of your adoption, then maybe you may need to create a policy around what they can include there. What are the requirements for the picture that they're uploading, and just kind of having some things documented around that. And obviously, site quotas and site provisioning. So if, what are the quotas that you're putting in place for the different types of sites that you're using? If it's a collaboration site, it's going to be, this many megs or gigs. If it's a team site, it's going to be this. You just want to have that documented. And then site provisioning, so that kind of goes with that. If a user requests a new site, what is the process there? So do they need to, if they request a site, whose approval do they need? Where does the site need to be placed, basically? Is there training that's going to be required? Who's going to be this new site admin for this site, and who's going to manage it? Is there going to be, is it a temporary kind of ad hoc site? Is there an archive process that needs to be put in place? Just kind of making sure you have all of that. Search, so just in general, if there's new result sources, if we're going to be crawling content outside of SharePoint, just making sure that we have the policy in place for that as well. File types and size, are you going to increase the maximum upload for files? If you have to increase that, you need to look at things like if they're uploading, 100 meg files often, then maybe there's, you may need to create a new site for that, or handle that in a different way. So just making sure that you think through that. And also file types. Are they going to be allowed to put CAD drawings out there or not? Are they going to, allow all types of videos, all types of images? Or are you going to need to limit any of those? Reporting. Talked about that. That's the search reporting. That's the usage reporting that you can get out of SharePoint. And then also, if you have third-party tools that you're using for any kind of governance, like AvePoint, those types of reporting as well. And then finally, one of the things that I mentioned here is language packs. So, are you going to be, including language packs? Which language packs are you going to install? Are you going to use the machine translation service, which is a whole kind of new thing that's pretty complicated with 2013, and then just making sure that you have a policy around that as well. And there's a lot more that can be included there, but we'll kind of just did a high-level thing. So the next section is information management, and I actually, what do you guys think? I have about another 10 slides, and we have about 8 minutes. So do you guys think that we should maybe stop for some questions, and then I can do the second half next week? Thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Kevin saying yes.
Are you going to be around next week? Are you going to be able to do that? I know I'm teaching my power user class all week, so I won't be there.
I should be able to. Yeah, I should be able to.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. Do y'all want to spend? So I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but we could also talk a little bit about Ignite and stuff too for the last.
I think that governance is definitely worth 2 weeks, but I really encourage anybody who's watching this to really think about questions about governance that you may have next week. Sometimes we put you guys on the spot with the question thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have 25 live viewers, so that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot. So, a lot of the times you just, get hundreds of people watching it, kind of later. But live viewers, I mean, it's up to you guys. So, yeah, I guess come back next week. Ignite, Microsoft Ignite was last week. We broadcasted live from our booth, our Rackspace booth. It was a lot of fun. I had a funny comment that I thought I'd share with you guys. I was reading through. So Todd Klin and I taught a all-day, 8-hour OneDrive for Business session at Ignite on one of the pre-day things. And I was sifting through just the little evaluations and comments and things about it. And I had 2 or 3 in there where they complained that SharePoint, they weren't interested in SharePoint, and the session description didn't say anything about SharePoint, and they were complaining that the session was mostly SharePoint. OneDrive for Business is SharePoint, so I really honestly I didn't realize that people didn't know that that's what it was. So that was kind of interesting perspective for me. But yeah.
We had a couple of comments come up.
A couple. There's Carlos. We met him in person.
Hey, Carlos. All right.
I think I like Carlos says regarding IT peeking at content to assure governance around secure content. Reports on permission changes could be provided through auditing, as well as views, if not SharePoint Online. IT could have permissions removed and then monitored if there are changes. It's hard to say IT can have their permissions removed, though, because who would do that at the highest level? IT. So at some point, the farm administrator can give themselves access to everything. If somebody has full access to central administration, they can give themselves full access to the content. So that is a little problematic. And often, a lot of times, in smaller companies, IT people would have sneakier ways around it. They could create fake accounts just for themselves, all kinds of things. So it's a slippery slope trying to control people who have farm-level access to the server. But like Kevin says, generally they're not going to do that without some sort of motivation. I do like the idea of the auditing, though. That way, at least you can see who did it, and you can keep track of it later, or you can show that somebody in IT was breaking the rules to get to the content. So that's a good idea, Carlos. Exactly. And someone else asked if SharePoint Designer 2016 is not going to happen. I've heard that as well, though Microsoft hasn't really said exactly what that means.
Yeah, they haven't. I don't think they announced a replacement. They just announced that there's going to be no SharePoint Designer 2016. I missed that session, though, where they announced it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
As I understand, it's been put on hold. They did announce at the Ignite in one of the sessions that there wouldn't be one, but I read later on a developer blog that it's actually just been put on hold. It's kind of like when they released 2013 without some of the functionality that we all really wanted and desired. They're just the development team just having some difficulty getting it to work with some of the new architecture and new technology that they're throwing in, and they also would really like it to go back to being able to have a lot of the functionality that we missed so much from the SharePoint Designer 2013, like the design view. They're looking at putting that back in for 2016, and it's just causing them some headaches.
That's good to know, though. I know the design view has been pretty widely missed, so that'll be cool. I mean, they have to have something because of their new workflow engine that they're piloting, with all that stuff. But
yeah, there were a lot of, according to the blogs I read, there were a lot of just really interesting and emotional and passionate comments about some of the things that didn't get included in 2013. Now, I know Microsoft took the official stance that it was by design that they took those out, but the developer blogs I read back in the day were all about, we really couldn't get it at release time to work with the HTML5 that SharePoint was built on, SharePoint 2013, so they just disabled a lot of functions, which is why you still see a lot of those same buttons in the ribbons that don't really do anything now. And so they're really, from what I've read and the feel I get, is that they're really trying to go back and make it a useful tool, not just a workflow builder.
Yeah, because it's really what it's become.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you use Designer 2013 at all?
I actually still do,
okay.
Despite the fact that you can use any other design tool to build your site. I still found myself heading back to a familiar ground in Designer.
Alrighty. Yeah, I was just curious too, because really, I only use 2013, but it's only for SharePoint Designer 2013, just for workflows. I don't think I've gone back to 2010 and on 2010 sites to do things in Design View, but I've only used 2013 for workflows. So I was just curious as a branding guy if you're still using it.
I mean, like I said, they made it in 2013 so you could use anything.
Right.
But Designer 2013 is just a little more SharePoint aware, which just makes certain things a little bit easier. Then the integration with the rest of the site is handy.
Yeah, makes sense. All right.
Oh, all right. Awesome. Thanks,
we'll do,
Joelle.
No problem.
Very-
We'll do part 2 next week. It may not
Okay.
it may not run the full hour though, so it may only be like a 30-minute, but that shouldn't be a big deal.
Everybody will come with their questions next time.
Yeah, definitely. Please have questions.
Yeah.
We'll be happy to answer.
Do you have an example of a governance plan? Like, it would be kind of hard because you wouldn't want to show like any kind of customer information on the screen, but just like the expansiveness, one of those. It'd be interesting to be able to kind of show the structure. Maybe that's just off the top of my head.
I don't have one that's got anything redacted right now, but I could possibly do some redacting over the next week and show something.
Cool. All right. Let's see. Joni says reporting and auditing. She's running this problem. Some of the reporting functions not working with 365. They just added new reporting and auditing. They just announced a bunch of it last week. So that's going to be in the Compliance Center in Office 365.
Good to know.
Take a look at that. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.